The gaming ban for minors in China. Now, obviously, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's also not entirely unexpected. This new law supersedes 2019 rules that allowed 90 minutes per day and forbade playing between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m., with the justification back then being that, well, kids shouldn't be playing too many video games, and they shouldn't be up late such that it will affect their schooling, which is, I mean, fair enough, but whether that is the role of the state or the role of the parent is something that I think a lot of people would disagree about. The 2019 measures also limited minors' monthly spending on games to a maximum of $57, which appears to be unchanged. This new policy also enforces a policy requiring game companies to require players' real names when logging in. I mean, imagine giving up your minor data protection laws in order to make sure that those minors who companies are now by law collecting information from are not playing too many video games. That's an interesting double-edged sword right there. The press release on state media said it is indisputable that indulging in online games affects normal study life and teens' physical and mental health.
I could see that.
Young Chinese gamers are lashing out at the new rules. One objection: sexual consent at 14. At 16, you can go out to work, but you have to be 18 to play games. This is really a joke. You know,
pretty good observation as well.
I don't think I could have put it any better myself. Now, to be clear, there's nothing that the Chinese government can do to prevent a minor from playing a single-player game completely disconnected from the internet. If there was, I'm sure they would be trying to figure out how to do that. In fact, my understanding is that functionality like that could end up being baked into game platforms like the Chinese version of Steam, so that if you are playing a single-player, like, offline game, it could theoretically be enforced. But my understanding is there's no actual enforcement or attempt to enforce any kind of rule like that. This is mostly focused on online gaming. So let's talk, Luke. How would this have affected your childhood? Why don't we start with that?
Pretty majorly, but probably not as much as you would think. We were an extremely sports-heavy household. I played a lot of sports. Many days of the week, I was out at practice or at game day. I'm remembering now, I rated in WoW. So that was 2 nights a week, and essentially every single other night playing sports. So I wouldn't have been able to do that.
But see,
because that would generally take 3 hours.
But the problem here is that, am I misinterpreting this? Is there only a 1 hour window in which you can play video games?
Yeah. Everyone is tied within that 1 hour window. That's one of the most interesting things to me personally about this whole thing. Is the one specific 1 hour window between 8 and 9 p.m., which is like kind of sort of neat in a way, because I feel like, you know, all your friends are going to be online.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Because I mean, the thing about having something like a weekly limit is that if you were, you know, you had a sports ball practice on Tuesday night, or you had a family dinner on Wednesday night, and you know, Thursday night you had some homework to catch up on Friday night, you could be like, woo, I'm staying up late, I'm gonna play video games all night, woo, I'm gonna play some Pokemon Blue. That's not possible. You can't really ration if you don't have a ton of flexibility in terms of how you take advantage of that limited amount of time that you're allowed to spend gaming. What I want to know is, actually, this is great. Floatplane Chat's already talking about it. Pirate LV says, rip their power grid. All those PCs starting up at once. Gotta spin them hard drives. 1.2 billion hard drives spinning up at the same time.
It's a lot. It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, and like it mentions, this is only online play, so this really isn't going to restrict everything. There is a lot of single player games. I do wonder, and they might only do it for China, but I wonder if this might reduce the amount of single player games that require online handshakes constantly. You know, the amount, there's a huge amount of always online single player games, and again, maybe this just changes for China. Maybe this doesn't change at all. But I wouldn't be surprised if certain companies started kind of going like, "Oh, wait a second, we might get more sales if we don't make this single player game always online."
But then
Um,
again, I don't want to generalize, but China has been sort of a hotbed for piracy. So, if anything, I think a lot of these always online requirements are actually specifically targeting the Chinese market. So, do
yeah, I
you
mean,
really remove these
effectively
limit?
everything gets pirated anyways.
There's two major questions here, right? Like, one is, do video games actually harm you to such a degree that you should be limited to an hour a day? Like, are these harmful? um
The statement that they made is indulging in online games affects normal study life and teens' physical and mental health. Your study life and your physical health, like, yeah, unquestionably. I also think the impact of online games on someone's mental health is actually probably a very interesting thing to look into. And I think in a lot of cases, it's probably negative. If you're notably surrounding yourself specifically with friends, um, that's kind of its own thing, and that's interesting. Um, but I think a lot of times you just end up in COD lobbies where everyone's just screaming into the mic as many profanities and offensive things as they possibly can. And I don't know how helpful that necessarily is. So that specific statement, like they're probably on base with it. Um, that being said, I don't know. It
uh,
gets interesting because it's a different country and it's pretty much as different as you could possibly imagine.
I mean,
So like
is it possible that we just are completely out of touch Westerners and have no idea that actually this gaming addiction among Chinese youth is an epidemic that is destroying an entire generation of people? Like, I
it's
don't know.
different. It's different, right? It's very different over there. I have no idea. I
I
can't
mean,
I can't claim to say things with fact about a place that I know very little about.
this is a great comment from Thelonious Mac that says this is not just about gaming. China's concerned about games being used as a means for subversive communications. It's hard to monitor the messages between every dwarf in a WoW server, for example. But the thing about that is that, okay, actually, that's kind of a good point. I was gonna say, having an hour when everyone's online is basically, if anything, increasing the amount of potential noise that you might have to sift through in order to find these
It doesn't have to be sifted
subversive
through live.
communications, right? Um, because like literally everyone is going to be online at exactly the same time. The odds of coming across something useful seems to me might be lower. But then again, if you are limiting their ability to communicate to just 1 hour a day, um, maybe that's just sort of deemed useful. But then the thing is, I mean, these are kids, right? These are probably not revolutionaries that are gonna storm the Capitol. Is this really who we're concerned about? Like, help me out here.
I don't know. It's very different there, right? Like, I don't know.
So
It's
should
I don't think I can pose any real understanding of this because I don't understand. I lack so much knowledge on Chinese culture and their situations. Like something that was brought up last time we talked about one of these topics, was it was mentioned that like, oh, the government shouldn't be like taking care of the kids. The parents should be taking care of the kids. And someone brought up, well, okay, it's very common for work hours to be longer there.
yeah.
The parents might not be home. So like the government is trying to step in to help with that because a lot of them are not home and can't afford a nanny. Um, so like it's kids just alone at home by themselves. So they're trying to exert some amount of control there. That's an unfortunate thing that's becoming a little bit more common here, but is not really a standard in North America, I would say. So it's something that is foreign um, to me. And that's not something I would have necessarily expected. But if the kids are just running around at home alone, trying to force them to do something else other than just play games, might make sense. I don't know. It's a situation I've never had to deal with. So I don't know. It's very, very different.
I mean,
One hour all at the same time seems a little odd, but
Tim SP says, I think every generation has their vices that they, attempt to protect children from. When I went to
yeah,
university,
that
my
too.
dad kept warning me about card players who flunked out when he went to school. They spent all their time like playing cards instead of studying.
People want to
Um,
do stuff that isn't studying, and there will always be something. You can, what is that? You can push the circle down the road with a stick. You can push the ring down the road with a stick, whatever that old game was.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
people will find a way to distract themselves.
Play some kick the can, some ring sticks,
Yeah,
some ball in a cup.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I hate it. I think it's out of touch. I think that treating video games like there's some kind of like devil that should be basically. I mean, it's in a way this is more regulated than even legitimately dangerous substances are in many parts of the world. Like it's kind of it's just baffling to me, but I also never really had the very, very toxic gaming experiences that some people seem to experience, right? Like I never was so addicted to gaming that it prevented me from functioning in my day-to-day life. And I know that that
Right.
is a thing that some people do experience. But here's what I want to know is, I mean, China is, whether you like it or not, whether you want to admit it or not, is an authoritarian regime, right? So who's to say that this isn't just an experiment? Well, let's start with the kids because we can kind of,
Mm.
but think of the children in order to justify it. And if it's a success, then we roll this out throughout because from a government standpoint, why wouldn't I just prefer if everyone was being productive? You know what I mean? Like video
Yeah.
games, I don't know if you could. I don't know if you can prove that it is indisputable that indulging in online games affects normal study life and physical and mental health, but you can certainly indisputably prove that it's not productive. It doesn't produce anything.
Well, there's I don't know. There's some like, especially in the times of COVID, I would say it's a good way to get social energy out. Like if you and all your friends jump online, like that's a social activity. Um,
But it's
there's
not
also different types of
productive. What does it produce?
happiness.
No, that's not a product.
You can still produce happiness. It's a drug in your brain.
Okay, I mean, I guess. Okay, we want to talk now. You're producing dopamine hits. I mean, by that logic, why don't we all just do hard drugs then?
I no, I think
That's
it would be.
productive then, by
I
your
don't think it.
definition.
Okay, so dopamine would come from the game itself, but I believe the social pleasure would be something else, not dopamine. I can't
Okay.
claim enough to know to name it off the top of my head, but serotonin, is that right? I don't know. Anyways, I think there's benefits that you could argue that could come from it, but I don't know.
Uh,
I think
John
it's
Wick
very easy to argue the otherwise.
John
The
Wick in
other,
the float plane chat says, "Yeah, let's just destroy this multi-billion-dollar gaming market." Um, Honestly, right now it seems like the CPC gives exactly zero about the economic damage of their policies. I mean, you see the way they're cracking down on big tech over there. Honestly, some of the things they're doing are moves that I completely agree with. Not all of it, obviously,
they're
but
specifically going after billionaires in China
yeah.
in a negative way. Like they are trying to crack down on billionaires in China. It's very different to hear. That's another one of those things where like it's very different over there. So it's difficult.